Today is Tuesday. Yesterday, we learned about Rubin Carter, and we learned about crimes that were committed all the way back in 1966. We learned about how Rubin Carter was framed for those crimes and ended up in prison. You read about his fight for justice. You heard from his friend John Artis, who was also arrested with him, and you learned how he ultimately was released from prison. We also learned about a guy by the name of Bob Dylan and his connection to Rubin Carter. How Dylan became inspired by Carter's story and wrote a song to document it. That song ended up playing a big part in getting Carter released from prison. Today, we're going to listen to the song for the first time. The lyrics of that song really read like poetry, and that is a staple of Bob Dylan's music. Bob Dylan's a legendary musician, not because of his musicianship, but because of his lyrics. We've talked about musicians like him who have also been poets, Tupac Shakur especially. Dylan's exactly the same, someone who documented culture, documented life through their music, and it really reads like poetry. Dylan was huge in the 1960s. Some of you may have heard some of his most famous songs or heard parts of his most famous songs. Most of them read like poetry. How many years must some people exist before they're allowed to be free? And how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. That's one of Bob Dylan's most famous songs. Again, really reads like poetry. Some of the other ones that were real famous include The Times They Are Changing, Knocking on Heaven's Door. Some of you may have heard that one, Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door. So Bob Dylan was already very famous in the mid-'70s by the time he wrote the song Hurricane. In this song, he really tells a story. He documents what happened that night, what happened in the days and weeks following Rubin Carter's arrest, and how Carter ended up in jail. So it's written like a poem. The lyrics really look like stanzas. The rhymes, the way he writes really is like poetry. But it reads like a book, a really good book, with great characters and great characterization. That's something that makes this particular song so enjoyable. And of course, it is also a great rock song. In the song, Dylan talks about racism. He talks about the games that the cops played with criminals on the street to try to get Carter behind bars. He also mentions a guy by the name of Gentleman Jim. Now, Gentleman Jim Corbett was a white American boxer, not back in the 1960s, all the way back in the 1800s. But Gentleman Jim was a little different than most other boxers. He went to college. He worked in a bank. He dressed really nicely. He wore expensive clothes. He spoke like a well-educated gentleman. That's why he got the nickname Gentleman Jim. So Dylan mentions him in this song, so it's important that you know who he is. There's a slide also that tells you a little bit more about Gentleman Jim. So it's important, like I said, it's important that you know who this guy is. There is some bad language in the song you're about to hear, including a word that we've discussed at length in class. It may be offensive to some, but it is very real, and that's why Dylan includes it in the song. So I want you to listen to the song today. I want you to read along with the lyrics. There's also a lyric sheet in Google Classroom that you should be using all week while we discuss this. Listen to the song, try to enjoy it, learn from it, and most importantly, like we always do, think about it while you listen and while you read. We'll dig deeper tomorrow.